All right, hello. All right. So let's do Caplan now. With Sparrow's article was pretty, he little nuts and bolts philosophy. He was looking at Harris and Sobolescu and saying that you can't, their consequentialism and libertarianism don't jive. That if you're consequentialist, then parents would be obliged to use technologies to create the happiest people possible, or the people who would contribute to the greatest happiness in society possible, or whatever our standard of utility is. Caplan is concerned more with what is it that he's not a consequentialist, essentially. He's concerned with, for independent reasons, if we just look at the decisions parents would make themselves, what's wrong with allowing parents to use genetic technologies to produce the best possible child they can, that is, the most happy child? Well, he starts out with the expected discussion of Nazis and the Holocaust, which he says is entirely appropriate. That he says the Nazi drive to design future generations based on what can now be understood as invalid science, skewed by racism, led to concentration camps, forced sterilization, infanticide, and genocide. And this is largely the fear that everybody has about eugenics whenever the word is mentioned. That because our understanding of eugenics is essentially of population eugenics. He mentions that some in the disabilities community argue that efforts to use genetic information to prevent the birth of children with certain traits or behavioral dispositions can be construed as a form of eugenics. And we will read later in the reproductive ethics section an article by Buchanan, Brock, Daniels, and Wickler that considers seriously this argument of people in the disabilities community that in trying to eradicate certain genetically based traits that are anomalous or regarded as harmful or undesirable, that you are therefore it's implied that you are making an evaluation of people who live now with those traits already. But that's a future article. Caplan's going to argue in this piece that despite past abuses, the moral permissibility of eugenic goals have to be understood on its own terms. And he distinguishes between individual and population eugenics. There are differences in similarities he allows. Individual and population eugenics are conceptually distinct, though, but procreative decisions can be motivated by both concerns at the same time. For example, he gives examples here. Population eugenics need not be coercive, but historically, it almost always has been. He gives examples of some Orthodox Jewish sects and some priests of the Greek Orthodox Church as non-governmental coercion, that genetically linked traits that are common in those populations, the clergy of those churches often use subtle pressure on their people in their congregations not to reproduce if they are carriers of these traits that are linked to their ethnic groups. Individual eugenics, then. This is increasing the availability of genetic information for reproductive decision-making. The hope of using science and medicine to create children who get the best possible start in life, he says, is very different from the forced use of medical and scientific knowledge to solve society's perceived ills by creating biologically superior populations. Genetic enhancement in the future is likely to be a matter of parental decision-making. So he asks explicitly, what's wrong with allowing parents to use available information to select the biological endowments of their children? If in vitro fertilization becomes reliable, making analysis of genetic composition of embryos a simple task. Does the ease of obtaining the information make a difference? And if so, is that a reason to inhibit its availability? Could it be slowed anyway? We have to ask. Inevitability is not a moral claim, of course. In the section Health, Disease, Disability, and the Aims of Medicine, this is an important section for his argument. What is health? He asks. He argues that it has to be more than the absence of disease. It makes reference to the concept of optimizing not some minimal level of functioning, but optimal functioning. So to be well is not to function at adequate levels, but at optimal levels. This is his. Parents may mean by wanting their child to be healthy that they wish their child to be disease-free and to have the right number of fingers and toes and so on. But there are many, they may also mean that they want their child to enjoy the best possible physical and mental function. We need to be critical of Caplan here. Does that sound right? Is it out of a concern, for example, of health that parents and send their children to elite schools and special classes? He asks, is there anything morally wrong with seeking perfection as a goal of reproduction? Is there a persuasive argument against personal or individual eugenics? It says there's a certain degree of subjectivity involved in a notion of perfection, but there are a number of traits for which there should be something approaching universal consensus. Since we allow parents to teach religious values, hobbies, customs, and so on as they see fit, we ought to allow parents to decide their children's genetic characteristics. We should pause here. Are they the same thing? And one difference, of course, would be you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. You can send your children to elite schools and soccer camps and ballet classes and whatever else. But the child may hate them anyway. Isn't that different from programming into your child whatever you can in terms of not only abilities, what if we could determine what their desires would be? Those are quite different. Is there a difference then, we can ask, between seeking perfection after birth and before birth? He thinks not. How is concern for the child you will have different from the care for the child that you do have? He considers slippery slope arguments against allowing parents to select genetic traits that concern the possibility of eventual government interference. Caplan denies the cogency of such arguments when we examine current analogs of cosmetic surgery, psychoanalysis, and sports medicine. Since the availability of these interventions has not placed overt social pressure of parents to use them to advantage their children. How about considerations of equality? Will the availability of the selection of genetic traits lead to a genetic overclass, which possess advantages not had by those who couldn't afford them? This is like the Gattaca situation. Remember the movie with Ethan Hawke? What if there were it were possible for parents to select for children who are resistant to disease, who have a particular, who are ambitious, intelligent, so particularly disease resistance, say. So that would be desirable for employers, wouldn't it? And so let's say somebody who has a certificate from Optogene that they have these genetic traits is up against somebody who does not. Let's say it's because that person's parents couldn't afford the Optogene treatment. The applicant who didn't have that advantage can say, this is unjust. It's unfair because I didn't have that advantage. I didn't have, but then the person with the certificate can say, but I'm the best candidate, aren't I? He considers fair equality of opportunity. Fair equality of opportunity, he says, might require that society do what it can to ensure that access to genetic modification would be available to all who want it, and to compensate for differences with special programs and educational opportunities. This is referring to Rawls. He says rhetorically that it's hard to imagine that in a world that allows for so much social and economic inequality, that biological advantages would be even more objectionable. So there is that difference, we said, about being able to lead a horse to water. The advantages children actually receive from the special opportunities provided by wealthier parents still to a large measure depend on children's own interests and motivation. There are two problems then. What if interests and ambitions can themselves be subject to genetic control? And second, what if those modifications were to be germline modifications? That is, they're not confined to this particular individual, but can be transmitted to successive generations, or would be. Caplan finds more objectionable the possibility of modifications to the gene pool. So modifications that are germline, that get passed to successive generations. Our next article will be on the World Health Organization's policy and analysis of the possibility of DNA patents.